Hello and welcome to another Stellarian Games video. Every good adventure needs a map, and whether the Dungeon Master reveals the map to the players or not, the Dungeon Master always has a map in mind when he's creating the world that the adventurers are going to be living in and adventuring through. Oftentimes those maps become a reality for the players as well, and the Dungeon Master will hand out paper maps and scraps that help the players envision what that environment really looks like. Those paper maps really are traditional. They look like maps that we're familiar with, whether they're drawn in Inkarnate or one of the other online tools. It allows them to kind of get a sense of scale of the world. When I'm running my own adventures, I also tend to draw out city maps, just so that I have an idea of what the city is going to look like that they're going to go through. But it also inspires me to understand more about the city, so when they get there, I can explain it in a way that has a little bit more depth and reality. For this episode, we're going to be looking at how to make a three-dimensional map, something that looks like this. And I wanted to take the map kind of to the next level for myself to understand what the terrain looks like. Why is the city placed where it is? Why are the buildings and structures where they are? So I started by building just kind of a landmass out of the cardboard layers to give it some depth. And then I started adding in buildings and roads, just sort of how I would imagine a city would be built up in this kind of a terrain setting. So it was really more for me to allow myself to explore the city first before bringing the adventurers in with me. And as I did so, I built buildings that I didn't really plan on having as part of the adventure, but ultimately became kind of a center point and focus for the adventure, because the buildings, as I'm creating them, and the story in my head as I was gluing things together, as simple as it is, allowed me to build a really full and rich environment. So this video is going to show you how to make that three-dimensional map, and I hope you get inspired to make a map like this and find out really how interesting it is to build that world in a very miniature scale, not something that you can put miniatures and walk around the city, but enough that you can understand what the world is and lead your adventurers through it and have a really great time telling the story. So let's go to the table and see how it's done. Okay, for this project, we're going to start with a chunk of craft paper. This brown paper is very useful for making maps of ordinary kind, but for this I decided to square it up and use it to make my outline tracings for the topographical sections. I'm just drawing in the contour sections that will eventually become these styrofoam cutouts. And I'm cutting out the first layer kind of at that water level, and then tracing that onto a section of this cardboard. Then I cut out the next layer, trace that onto the cardboard, and each of these repeats will just be one section up on the contour map. This is a pretty simple, easy process. You just use that paper, and you just have to remember to start cutting from the bottom to the top, and you'll just create layer after layer of the topographical layers that you're looking for. You could use foam core instead of cardboard if you wanted a little bit cleaner look, or you could even use XPS if you wanted to do a little bit thicker piece as well. I decided to use cardboard simply because it's cheap and easy to use. Now I'm stacking up all of those contoured sections, and then starting on the bottom, gluing that to the base square, and then working my way up. In retrospect, this is probably the biggest mistake I made out of the whole project. I would definitely have left all of the land masses separate from the water to make the painting a lot easier. As it was, I ended up having to mask the water section after I painted it so that it wouldn't get sprayed with the other layers. So if you're going to spray paint it like I do, I would definitely recommend not gluing the land masses on until they're sprayed. All of those are just hot glued on, so that makes the assembly really easy. Then I'm taking it over to the spray booth and coating it with a black base, just so that I have a nice even coat. Then I'm adding some blue. I wasn't trying to make this photorealistic or anything, just kind of a representation of water, so I just decided to use blue spray paint. This could definitely use some more interesting paint jobs, but I decided to just leave it blue as is. I'm starting with kind of a khaki tan on the land masses after masking all of the water sections out. Then kind of going to a drab green, hard to see on this color, but it is sort of a drab green. Then I'm going to a darker green to kind of simulate forested sections, trees, things like that. And then coming in with a lighter green as well and highlighting that with the lighter green just to bring out some of the lighter vegetation areas. The blue and the brown obviously have to be dried between, and then once I started the colors, then I started working my way up, all while the spray paint was wet. Now I'm coming along with a blue regular paint, acrylic paint, and painting in a small river that's flowing into the water mass. Then I'm using some chipboard and cutting out some very small thin strips, and then using a scissors to make little tiny squares. These will eventually become the buildings on the map. Some different style of chipboard, some thinner, and I'm using this to make buildings as well as leaving some of those sections for walls. So I'm going to take those walls first and bend them into a rough shape of, the outer perimeter of this town. Then just using some white glue, PVA glue, and gluing that to the section where the wall section would be in place. Next, I'm gluing it down on the next layer. I'm not worrying about trying to join the wall down over the overlapping lips. The contour of this is meant to represent kind of a gradual slope anyways. They aren't really meant to be cliffs, except for they're doubled up or something like that. So I just got them to kind of butt into that open space and then drop to the next contour line. By having some folded lines in these walls, it also helps them stand while the glue is drying. Now I'm starting with the temple complex. I decided to cut out a little bit of a complicated section out of that chipboard, glue it in into several layers, and then glue that into place. Then some of the larger, fancier buildings, kind of the aristocratic buildings, are going to be placed up on this upper hill. So these are a little bit nicer buildings, larger structures, more interesting cutouts, surrounded by some servant quarters, things like that. Then I started filling in the rest of the town, working on the market squares, kind of where the main streets would be, where the market would be located, and then adding a whole bunch of small little buildings and huts in between to simulate all of the village location of housing and residential places, even some small market areas if you want to, some back alley places. Once all of those buildings are in place, I decided to start working on the dock section. This was going to be kind of a prominent feature in the campaign, so I wanted some docks with a shipyard. Across the river, there's another dock in kind of a competing little section of port. Now I'm coming along with some brown acrylic paint and filling in the roadways within the town. These are going to represent all of the market streets, things like that. So I decided to, as I was building all the buildings, really kind of designed it with those streets in mind. But I wanted to do the buildings first without having the structure of it in place before really doing that. That made the streets a lot more organic, kind of winding between buildings, rather than having the structure of the roadway first and then adding buildings. All right, so here's the finished product. I hope you liked this video. This was a really fun one to build just for my own creativity. but it also ended up being a really nice prop for the game session. So if you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you.